What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
He said it the way people say something they have rehearsed in their head a dozen times and finally get to drop like a little grenade, leaning in just enough so no one else would hear and keeping his voice light enough to pass for a joke if I pushed back. Telling me that I could not give a speech at his anniversary party because, and he paused here to make sure it landed, I had nothing worth saying, and I looked at his face and at the careful way he kept his smile steady, and I realized he needed me to accept that line the way a stagehand needs the curtain to stay put, so I nodded like it was no big deal and told him I would stay out of the way, and then I walked to my car, shut the door, and let the kind of laugh out that does not sound like joy at all. More like the click of a lock when you finally turn it the right direction. I know how this sounds, like I am fishing for sympathy or building up to some triumphant speech, and maybe I am, but I want to be honest about the part that stung, because it did not just sting in the moment. It snapped back years of small digs and quiet dismissals and family dinners where my place was to lift the trays, take the pictures, and keep the peace while he held court and told stories about business wins and renovations, and how he always knew how to make things happen. And maybe you have someone like that too, someone who thinks your value is to clap on time and not ask for a turn with the microphone, and you get so used to the role that you do not even realize you have picked up their lines and are saying them to yourself before they do. The part he did not know, and I did not tell him because I learned a long time ago that the smartest move with people who need all the oxygen is to breathe quietly on your own and build something while they are performing. Is that for more than a year I had been working after work and on weekends on a program that started as a little idea on a scrap of paper and grew into a thing that real people were using, a thing that kept me up late and made me feel awake again. And about a week earlier, while I was waiting for my coffee to finish, I opened an email that I had to read twice because my brain did not want to believe it. An email telling me I was receiving a national award for the program and that a small plaque and a formal letter were being sent by courier, and there was a line asking if I wanted a press notice to go out on the date of my choosing. And I sat there staring at that line with my heart pounding like it was trying to break a door down. I did not tell anyone, not my closest friend, not my mother, and certainly not my brother, because I wanted to pick my moment carefully, not to steal anything that was not mine, not to be cruel, but to take back something I had handed over without ever noticing, which was my right to speak when I had something to say. And if you are thinking that sounds dramatic, remember he opened this with "you have nothing worth saying." And I decided right then that if he wanted silence so much he could sit with the one silence he never plans for, the silence that comes when people realize they were wrong about you. So I texted the awards coordinator and asked a few polite questions about timing and media, nothing flashy, just logistics. And I scheduled the press notice for the evening of the party with a very simple note that the honoree preferred family be informed in person first, which made the coordinator laugh and say that was the nicest embargo request she had ever gotten. And I confirmed the courier would drop the package at my place that afternoon, and then I sat there with my phone in my hand and felt something I had not felt in a long time, which was not anger or hurt or even anticipation, but a kind of steady line forming in my head, a plan without fireworks, a plan that spoke in plain language and did not need to raise its voice. When my brother called later to ask if I could help with the slideshow for his toast, since I was good with tech and these things always stressed him out, I said sure, because I am polite even when I probably should not be. And I spent an evening pulling photos and little moments into a sequence that would make him look like the hero he needed to be, and while I worked I thought about all the times I had done this exact thing, propping up his narrative, smoothing the edges of his stories, and it made me feel strangely calm to realize I was not angry at him anymore. I was just done acting like the price of belonging was disappearing myself whenever he needed the spotlight uninterrupted. I sent him a draft link, and he wrote back with a line that made me smile, something about how I always make him look good, and I said I was glad to help and that I would bring my laptop to manage the audio since the venue sometimes had issues with the soundboard. And he said that would be great, and I could hear in his voice that loose, relaxed tone he gets when he believes everything is in place, which is what made what I did next feel less like a stunt and more like a simple correction. Because I opened the Keynote file, added one extra closing slide that was not flashy or aggressive, just a black background with white text that read, "Family acknowledgements will follow." And then I called the venue coordinator and introduced myself as the person managing the presentation and asked that the microphone be set to remain live after the slideshow until the acknowledgements were complete, because the family wanted to thank a few people who helped make the night possible, which is technically true and not in any way illegal, just a line item on a run of show no one but a planner ever reads. If you are wondering whether that counts as revenge, I get it, because it is not loud and it is not cruel, but it is the first moment where I reached into a script that always cast me as the extra and wrote myself a single line. One clear sentence that said I am speaking, and before I closed my laptop I took one more step that felt even better, which was to open the email thread where he had asked me to build the slideshow and to forward it to his wife with a short note thanking her for trusting me with the program flow and letting her know that the acknowledgement slide would prompt the MC to hand me the microphone for a quick minute, since her husband had asked me to handle that part. And then I sat very still and watched the typing dots appear and disappear until her reply came through with a cheerful thanks and a smile I could hear in the punctuation, and in that tiny exchange I felt the first clean click of a bigger lock turning. By the time I went to bed, I had the courier confirmed, the press notice scheduled, the microphone logistics handled, and the slideshow ride set up like a quiet rail that would deliver me exactly where I needed to stand. And I lay there thinking about how he would react, not in a vindictive way, more like a scientist who already knows the outcome of an experiment and is just waiting for the moment the beaker changes color. And I promised myself I would not gloat and I would not burn the night down, that I would keep my voice low and steady and let the facts talk, which is what people always claim to respect until those facts do not serve them, and I fell asleep with that promise in my mouth like a small coin I was not going to drop. The next morning, before work, I got a message from the awards coordinator asking if I wanted the citation language in a printable version for family, and I wrote back yes, please, and then added another request I had not planned on, asking if she could also send it to one journalist I trusted who had covered my field with fairness, with a note that I would confirm the exact timing later that evening, and when she said of course I scrolled to my friend's name and typed a single line that made my pulse thud in my throat in the best possible way, a line that said, "Tonight after the toast," and I put my phone face down on the table and let that sentence sit there, humming quietly. Because sometimes the softest sound is the one that changes everything right before it gets loud. The day the courier was supposed to come, I worked through my checklist like someone who has finally decided she is done asking for permission, confirming the delivery window, confirming the press embargo, confirming the run of show with the venue manager, who sounded grateful that someone wanted to deal with the boring parts. And while I was on hold listening to some generic music, I caught myself thinking about how many times I had done this exact thing for other people and called it support, when in reality it was me teaching everyone that I would handle the unglamorous labor while they stood under the lights, and the realization did not make me bitter, it just made me careful. Because this time the outcome would be different, and I did not want sloppiness to hand my brother an excuse to paint me as dramatic or unprepared. The package arrived late afternoon, not flashy, just a small box with a letter and a plaque wrapped tight, and I put it on the kitchen table and read the citation twice. Not to soak in praise, but to memorize the language so that if my voice shook later I could still deliver the facts clearly, and I took a photo of the letter for the coordinator so she could match the wording to the press notice. And then I placed the box into a plain tote and slid it upright next to my laptop where no one would pay attention to it unless they were looking for it, which no one ever is when you do not advertise yourself as a person who might surprise them. I called my parents to ask what time they planned to arrive, and my mother launched into a schedule that, of course, placed me in the practical role again. Could I swing by the bakery? Could I check the slideshow? Could I keep an eye on the gift table because last year someone misplaced envelopes, and I said yes to the tasks that mattered and no to the ones that were about convenience more than need, and when she hesitated at the boundary I let the silence hang. A polite pause that communicated, that I was not doing the usual thing where I filled every gap just to keep everyone comfortable, and she pivoted quickly because she is smart and has learned that a firm no from me is not personal, it is simply me choosing not to disappear. On the way to the venue, I parked for a minute and sent my friend the final line he was waiting for, the simple instruction to publish after the toast, and he wrote back a short confirmation with a timestamp that matched the run of show. And I stared at that time and felt the same steadiness I had felt when I set the microphone plan, like each small piece was locking into place without fanfare, which is how most wins happen in real life, not with a drum roll, but with a low hum of competence that no one notices until it fills the room. At the venue, I checked the audio, loaded the slideshow, hid my tote behind the lectern, and did the round of polite greetings that always goes the same way, relatives asking about work in a tone that implies they are bracing for a short answer, cousins bragging about things they assume are universal markers of success, and I let it all pass through me because tonight was not the night to correct anyone. Tonight was the night to let them discover who I have been without me pushing, and that difference matters because discovery changes people in a way lecturing never does. When the planner brought me the printed programs, I saw the earlier update I had slipped through had landed exactly the way I intended, a small line under the toast schedule that read family acknowledgements with my name. And I signed off with a neat checkmark because it looked official and calm rather than loud, and then I took one more step that felt like a real move, not petty, not vindictive, just precise, which was to text my brother's boss, who had once asked for a copy of my proposal and then stopped replying, with a warm note saying I looked forward to seeing him tonight and that I had a short acknowledgement to share that might interest him, and because power recognizes potential headlines faster than family does. He pinged back that he would keep an ear out, which meant the one person my brother likes to impress would be listening for me, and however the night turned, that alone already evened the ground. I arrived early enough to handle the quiet work that keeps a night from slipping, checking the laptop, running the slides, confirming with the planner that the microphone would stay live after the toast because the program listed family acknowledgements with my name. And while I moved through those steps, I kept replaying the way he had told me I had nothing worth saying, not to stir up anger or make myself brave, but to remember exactly what I was answering, which was not a single comment at all, but a long pattern of being assigned the role of the person who keeps everything smooth so someone else can shine. Guests started filtering in with that brisk energy people carry when they are excited about a party they think will confirm what they already believe about their world, and I did the greetings, and I took the hugs, and I accepted a few small jobs that mattered and declined a few that did not, and whenever someone tried to slip me into the worker slot with that tone that sounds like appreciation, but is really delegation, I let a polite no hang in the air long enough to be understood, because I was not mad at them and I was not trying to make a scene. I was simply not going to spend the little fuel I needed for later on tasks that belonged to someone else. My brother arrived with the familiar ease of a lead who knows the room will meet him halfway, clapped my shoulder, thanked me for making him look good, and told me to keep the tech simple so I did not get lost, which drew the practiced chuckle you hear when people laugh to keep things moving, and I said sure with a level voice because the best way to win sometimes is to let a person remain convinced there is no game at all. And as he moved on to greet the people who matter to him strategically, I adjusted the levels, tucked my tote behind the lectern where my hand would find it without looking, and felt the edge of the plaque through the canvas, a steady reminder that I was not here to disrupt his night so much as I was here to end mine. The long unspoken one where I rehearsed swallowing my voice. A cousin asked for help with photos as if I were event staff. An aunt announced too loudly that I always stay so busy with little projects, and an uncle launched a question about my work that turned into a monologue about his own before I finished the first sentence. And I let each moment pass without collecting it, because the goal was not to build a case about disrespect. The goal was to save my focus for the one exact minute where a clear sentence would do the work 100 explanations could not, which is why, when the planner brought the printed program and asked me to initial the handoff after the toast, I signed and walked the MC through the exact wording we had already rehearsed, routine and calm, and not one note theatrical, so nothing would feel hijacked when it happened. My phone buzzed with a brief message from my friend at the paper asking if we were still on for after the toast. And I replied that we were and asked him to use the citation's clean language about measurable outcomes because my brother respects results more than adjectives. And he confirmed the timestamp and added a short preview line that settled me the way a seatbelt click settles you at takeoff, and I slipped the phone away and checked the laptop one more time, adding a tiny cue in presenter view that would push a silent notification to him at the peak of applause. Not dramatic and not sneaky, just a well-timed signal that would let the story walk out into the world exactly when I finished saying what I came to say. Right before the toast, his boss arrived, shook my hand, and said he was looking forward to the slides because he had heard I made them tight, which told me he had read my note and would be listening when the MC invited me up. And while I am not above enjoying that small alignment of audience and intention, I kept my face neutral and my voice light, then reached behind the lectern and positioned the plaque where my fingertips could hook it without looking, because the simplest way to feel steady is to remove the chance of fumbling, and when the lights dipped and the MC tapped the microphone and the room leaned forward with that comfortable expectation that the story would be familiar and flattering, I took a breath that was more like a decision than a breath and placed one unopened envelope on the ledge of the lectern, the one with the cover letter folded on top, and as the first laugh landed and the slide advanced, I saw my cue sitting in the corner of the screen, the timer, quietly counting down to the exact second the applause would crest, and I felt the ground under me go still. When the MC handed the floor to my brother and the room settled into that easy rhythm people get when they expect a warm story and a safe punchline, I watched him tilt his chin and roll into his greatest hits about partnership and hustle and the grind that only the chosen few apparently understand, and I let it all wash over me without letting it stick. Because I already knew how this part went and I was not interested in picking apart his claims or tallying the parts he left out. I was interested in the moment that would land after the applause when the room expected the usual slide into cake and music and low chatter, only this time there would be a pause that did not belong to him. And I would step into it like a person who had paid for her own ticket and did not owe anyone an apology for taking the seat she had reserved for herself. He moved through the photos I had arranged so carefully you would think I loved him more than I loved myself, laughing right on cue when the crowd laughed, looking grateful when they sighed at an old picture, and when he referenced our family with one of those throwaway lines about how everybody plays a part and some people are better behind the scenes. I saw a few faces tilt toward me with that sympathetic smile people use when they have already accepted a story's hierarchy as natural, and I kept my expression easy because it served me for him to believe I was still tucked where he had left me. Meanwhile, my timer in presenter view kept the soft count that only I could see, and the tiny cue that would push my friend's notice to publish was sitting one pace away from the trigger, steady and patient the way good plans are, and I felt my fingers curl once around the tote handle to make sure the plaque was where I needed it, and then release, because the last thing I wanted was to look like I was clutching a sword when really I was holding proof. He closed strong, of course he did, because he is good at this, and the applause rose right where I knew it would, and as the sound crested I advanced the final slide that read family acknowledgements with my name in clean text that no one could argue with, and the MC, who had practiced this with me twice, and who liked how straightforward I was, stepped in with a cheerful transition and invited me up for a brief thank you, and I watched my brother try to wave it off with a friendly gesture that looked like he was protecting the flow but really said he wanted to keep the last word, and it would have worked most nights because I give ground to avoid friction, but not tonight. So I smiled at him the way you smile at a stranger who has made a harmless mistake, and I moved past him to the lectern, steady and calm, because the simplest way to show people who you are is to act like it is already obvious. You know that tight beat right before you speak when your heart decides to audition for a new role and your mouth forgets it knows how to work. I had that for one breath, and then it was gone. And I heard my own voice land clean in the microphone as I thanked the guests for being there and thanked the planner and mentioned how much work goes into a night like this that most people never see, and people nodded because they love being reminded that effort exists. And I said I had one. acknowledgement to add that was personal and short, and I could feel the room do that little lean that is half curiosity and half impatience, because no one expects anything large to come from a person they have trained themselves to treat as background. And that expectation is the best cover in the world if you know how to use it. I said my brother had told me earlier this week that I had nothing worth saying, and I made sure to keep my tone even and my face open so it could not be spun as bitterness, and a low ripple moved through the crowd the way air shifts when someone opens a door. And I let the words sit there a second because I wanted them to register as a fact and not an accusation, and then I said that was fine because sometimes we accept a role out of habit, but that I had something to share that might update the file on who I am, and I reached down to the tote without looking and lifted the plaque out with one hand, setting it on the lectern like it was just another program detail. And I kept speaking in that same even tone while my other hand slid the letter out of the envelope and unfolded it so the header faced the room, and I watched my brother's smile slip by a fraction as his boss, who had been halfway to the bar, stopped where he stood and turned back, and the MC took one reflexive step closer like she was about to take the mic if needed, which she was not, and I said, "I will keep this very brief," and then, without raising my voice or explaining anything I did not have to explain, I read the first line of the citation that named the award and the reason for it, and in the precise second before the room processed what it meant, I pressed the quiet trigger on the laptop that would send the green light to my friend, and I let the last word hang as the applause died into that heavy quiet people make when they are trying to calculate what they missed while they were busy looking somewhere else, and I looked straight at my brother and asked, still in a polite voice that could not be accused of showboating, if he would mind holding the plaque for a second so I could finish reading the letter without blocking the microphone, and as his hand came up, automatic and unsure, I knew I had already taken back more than a minute, and the next sentence would decide everything. When he took the plaque from my hand the way people take a fragile object they have not yet decided whether to admire or reject, I felt the room tilt just enough to let me step fully into the space I had carved. So I kept my voice level and unhurried and finished reading the part of the citation that described outcomes in simple, sober language that does not beg for applause, naming the people who used the program, the measurable changes that followed, and the independent review that verified it, because I knew that in this crowd the only thing that cuts through ego and habit is a clean list of results you cannot shrug off, and as I folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope I heard the first claps come from the back. Not the loud performative kind, but the deliberate kind that says a new fact has entered the room and we are adjusting, and I thanked everyone for letting me share one small acknowledgement on a night built for my brother, and I said that if any guests wanted details I would be happy to send the public link later, which was the cue my friend needed even if I had not sent the silent trigger a moment before, and my phone buzzed in my pocket with the confirmation that the piece was live and already climbing. So I let my hands rest on the lectern and looked at my brother with a calm face that did not invite a fight, and I said I was done, and the microphone was his if he wanted to add anything. He did the tiny laugh people do when they are buying seconds while their brain scrambles, told the room he was proud of me in a tone that tried to sound casual but landed short, and started to move toward his closing remarks, except the MC, who had read the program and understood that transitions matter, thanked me warmly and prompted the crowd to recognize the achievement with a fuller round, which they did because group energy is a real thing and no one wants to be the only person sitting on their hands, and during that wave my brother's boss, who is not known for generosity when the spotlight is not on him, stepped forward and shook my hand with a grip that carried a message, told me he had read about the program months ago on a regional site and wondered who was behind it, and asked if we could talk the following week about potential support, and when I said of course and matched his professional warmth without adding an ounce of need, I saw my brother's face settle into that careful neutral look he uses when he smells smoke and is not sure where the fire is, and I felt absolutely no triumph that needed to be performed, only relief that the facts were finally walking around without me pushing them. I stepped off the stage and let the MC close the segment, and while the crowd shifted and the music rose, small circles of conversation formed with my name in them, not gossip so much as recalibration. The way people update a file when new information makes the old label look lazy, and I moved through those circles at a normal pace, answering questions with plain words and no extra shine, because the point was never to steal the night but to correct a record. And the people who mattered most to me understood that instantly, which is why when my mother came over with eyes that said 10 different things at once, I hugged her and told her we could talk later and that I was fine. And she squeezed my hand in a way that told me she had always suspected there was a bigger story under my quiet, and she was angry at herself for not demanding to hear it sooner. And I told her there was nothing to be angry about because sometimes people only hear what you are ready to say, and I had not been ready until now. My brother tried to regroup with a joke about how I had stolen his thunder, and people laughed because they felt they were supposed to, but the laugh landed thin and drifted away, and I did not rescue him because it is not my job to make every moment safe. And I certainly did not twist the knife because I promised myself I would not become the thing I was fighting, so when he pulled me aside and said he wished I had told him in advance, I said in the same even tone that he had told me I had nothing worth saying and that I had chosen to speak when I felt like it, and that we were even now, and if he wanted to be proud of me it would mean more if he could do it without qualifiers. And he looked at me like I had rearranged the furniture in a room he thought he built, and he said he would think about it, which is not an apology, but it is not nothing, and for once I did not try to pull more out of him than he could give. By the time the cake was cut, my phone was vibrating steadily with messages from people who mattered and people who suddenly wanted to matter. The article had been picked up by 2 larger outlets. The coordinator confirmed the national organization had posted the citation, and my friend texted a screenshot of the headline with a note that said they would like an interview next week if I was game, and I told him yes, as long as we kept it about the work and not about family drama, and he wrote back that the work was the story, which is exactly what I wanted to hear, because the best revenge is not a spectacle but a new status quo where you do not have to argue for your own reality anymore. I left before the last toast and said polite goodnights, and I walked to my car without the shaky adrenaline I expected, feeling instead the low, steady hum of something repaired. And I know there will be fallout and a few relatives will call it rude and some will pretend they always believed in me, and my brother will either rise to meet the new version of us or he will keep living in the old one. But either way, the sentence he gave me has been returned with interest, because the next time someone tries to park me in the background, I will not waste energy pleading my case. I will just step to the microphone, speak in a calm voice, and let the room adjust. And if you want the final answer, it is simple and it is not cruel, it is just accurate. I waited, I timed it, I spoke, the truth landed, and the silence that followed belonged to me.